Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon. I'm the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people and specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past, present, and future and thank them for their stewardship of the land. I'll also mention that as a library, we have a lot of resources where you can learn about history and colonialism and their impacts on Native land. Welcome to tonight's program with Laura Day and Cedar Saigo, presented as part of Seattle Reads You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World. Before we get started, I have just a couple announcements. First, I want to thank everybody who made tonight possible, including our partners over at Elliott Bay Book Company and the whole host of our Seattle Reads partners. Let's give Elliott Bay a little, yeah. We have a whole host of Seattle Reads partners as well, and I encourage you to head to spl.org/Seattle Reads to find out all about all the various amazing poetry partners we had this season. We're also grateful to the Seattle Times for their generous support of library programs, and special thanks as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everybody in our community. So thanks to all of you who donate to the foundation. It helps make programs like this possible. We have assistive listening devices available on the table here with the blue tablecloth. So if you find that you need a headset and you're too shy to come down and grab it, or you're further up and you can just give me a wave, I'll be hanging out kind of by the piano and I'll bring one to you if you find you need that during the program. And finally, you received a survey when you came in. Please feel free to fill them out after the event and return them to us as you head out. We also have a little place on that blue tablecloth for the surveys. So now I'm delighted to introduce tonight's program. The format tonight is going to be two wonderful poets reading and talking about their work. And I think I should just say that as part of this, the reason why we wanted to do a separate program with Laura and Cedar was that we know that people got a chance to get a taste of their poetry in the You Are Here anthology, but we're lucky enough to have them both live pretty locally. And so they were both gracious enough to share their time with us so that we can have another opportunity to learn more about their work and hear more of their poetry beyond what's included in the You Are Here anthology. And so that was kind of the genesis for tonight's program, and we're delighted that they're both here. So the format is going to, Laura's going to talk and read about her work, and then I'll come back and I'll introduce Cedar, and then Cedar will talk and read about Cedar's work, and then we will have an opportunity for some Q&A, and they'll be at that table there, and we'll run mics to folks in the audience for that, and then we will have book signings. So if, our friends at Elliott Bay have copies of both authors' books as well as copies of You Are Here, if you somehow managed to not have that yet. And so we'll do a book signing to close the evening. So without further ado, I'm delighted to first welcome Laura Day. Laura is a poet and teacher, a lifetime resident of the Pacific Northwest. Laura studied creative writing at the University of Washington and the Institute of American Indian Arts. She has served as Poet Laureate of Redmond, and Poet Planner for King County, Washington. And in fact, we have some of the poem creation chapbooks, which are linked to the Poetry in Public Places of Landing project that Laura created, and they are available on that table right over there as well. You're welcome to take one as you head out. Laura has published several books, including Tributaries, which was the winner of the American Book Award, Instruments of the True Measure, winner of the Washington State Book Award, and Severalty, which is forthcoming in September of this coming year, so this fall. Laura is Eastern Shawnee, and she lives in Washington with her family. So please help me welcome Laura Day.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight. It's beautiful to see such a wonderful audience. Thanks so much for hosting this event. It's such an honor and pleasure to read with Cedar. We often get to read together, and it's always something that I look forward to and find extremely inspiring. And of course, thanks so much to Booksellers for coming and supporting this. So I thought that I would read some poems tonight that generally engage with place, and I'm hoping that perhaps some folks will recognize some of the places within these poems. One thing that I would like to do with your patience, because one of the poems that was selected in the anthology does refer to Shawnee language, is I think I'll take a moment just to introduce myself in Shawnee. It's a very beautiful language, and often this would be the only time some people get to hear this beautiful American trade language. So I'm going to say hello to you and introduce myself as I would if we all spoke the language together. It's evening, so I would say Ho'e sipukonya, hakaho'e sila simamopwe, Laura de nitesido, sawanwe nevi. And I'm just greeting you with an acknowledgement that we're sharing the evening together. I hope everybody's breathing well, feeling comfortable. My name's Laura Day, and I'm a citizen of the Shawnee Nation. I grew up in the Snoqualmie Valley, not too far from here, and I grew up on a farm, so I got a chance to break the land, work with fellow creatures, and garden my whole life. And some of these poems engage with those concepts as well. So I'll begin. The beauty screen intercedes in the valley of my hometown. Which side is paradise, and where might a person find just one of its 12 gates? The clear cut unrobes an uncanny beauty. Emerald ferns stretching along the ropey brown earth of deer trails, laid bare like the part line on a head gone rapidly bald. Certain slivers of vellum in sacred texts, ruptured by the owl of aging or the hand of the parchmenter, are stitched close in bottle green thread. The scars meander like bean plants, creeping up the page in search of a strut to grow against. Mistaken for a gardener upon my return, furrows in the story, furrows in the soil. I clear a circular bed for mounds of flint corn and spokes of vining beans in the counter aspect of a clock face. When time is split into a severalty, who can resist lifting the green lid of creation? The shovel's splintering pole harvests trinity circles of deep light into a cool, tapered path. Next, I'd like to read the book that is included in the anthology. And I've been really fortunate as an adult to learn to speak the Shawnee language alongside my tribal members. The last fluent speaker in my family was my grandfather and grandmother, and they were born speaking Shawnee, but unfortunately lost the language when they were sent away to school. So it was not passed to my father. And so I feel very privileged to be able to live during this time of Shawnee sovereignty and to experience this re-exposure to the language. So this poem both mentions this region and its histories, but also the experience of learning language. And this poem, of course, is in the anthology. This is called Bad Wolf. I husk the houses from the land, each one as similar in size and shape as the battered crates behind the shipping store. The lake wasn't here, with its jagged edges and dikes puffing like keloid scars, so I drink it. I uninvite to receive more clearly what the fringed prairie might have been, with its controlled burns and bone games and berries. In language class, I'm learning the story of the wolf who is perpetually punished for his bullyish pride, made to pursue a hornet nest and drown in his own reflection, snout gleaming with the honey he was hoping to bite. I repeat phrases and parse pauses from stresses. The markers I seek are nearly impossible to find. What is under this water and what was once water? Here where a trail crossed, people gathered. Then the hop farmers dug axe heads and projectile points still bearing the scar from the plow. Within 5 miles, the battles of the first treaty wars are under the barns, and the soccer goals, and the signs, allowing recreational drone flying. At the prairie, a solitary Douglas fir's high branches start well above my head, telling me it was once one of many. I must move the tendons of my chin and hold my tongue differently to string together the consonants of my own language. To say wolf, I have to open my lips in a pantomime of alarm. I'll read another poem that engages with one of our beautiful cities of the region, maybe what's right underneath one of the beautiful cities of our region. And this poem is called The Honest Tongue. Avoiding the stockade and bastioned gate, but inadvertently walking over the site of the gallows. Estuary cattails pierce a lacy mimic of the fort's dark-piked palisades. Red-winged blackbirds harry a great blue heron who flies, with a shiver of cracked eggshells slipping from its beak. Some languages reverse past and present, with sun and moon, black-lined days on the calendar, and the wristwatch's ticking goad, all coiled at the root. First church, first sawmill, first school and lending library, first brace of public executions, first house of brick. Where do the great orators keep themselves at present? Where land takes its name first from its people, then perhaps from the delicate mauve blooms of fringe cup woodland stars. And I thought I'd read a few poems about my hometown here in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of these poems talk about a variety of hometowns the world over, but this one talks about the Snoqualmie Valley, where I did grow up here. Great Founder's Axe. Early accounts of cedars lining lower reaches of the Cedar River estimate circumferences of 100 feet. The wood is gone, the blade misremembered. Who swings the axe to crack wafers of such godly size? First blows hew deep fissures of erasure, while the last have yet to land. Beg a timepiece to pin down an analog for the word early. Forgiveness is to decision, as a living tree is to decision, as mortality is to a good watch, heavy in pocket, solid in hand. To say garden in Shawnee, one must describe tenderly rupturing the skin of the land, to spear outside the constraints of violence or wounding. The verb is inherently communal and perpetual. Bottle green larvae hang like earrings from the far branches of an established oak. Should an inchworm fall to my shoulder, it measures the stitches of my funeral shroud. "100 horses under the chestnut tree. Rain drove them across the island and under the tree. Some riders may have forgotten their childhood beds, conjugations, aspects of critical dicta in the clink of metal stirrups as the herd nettled nose to flank, inside pockets of opposing air. Trumpets and tinges cleaved the distances. The sensation of impact may have heaved, as in the flat sputter of a heavy body, unhorsed and wind-knocked. The queen's best equerries squabbled under the chestnut tree's broad arms, long and far from here. It was wartime. That tree has since splintered. The walled sentinel city, Standing forests sway under walls of fresh water. Cold presses the needled eyelids of the watchers. Peregrine falcons nest in crevices of the Great Falls and in the steepest skyscraper ledges alike. Walled cities can be classified as intact, demolished, pristine, visible from the colonial zone, romantic, bombed, imagined. 100 air miles from any external border, and seizure is permissible. Silence the only grudgingly tolerated defense. Certain locations entail permanent warfare. Some days up the Great River, cliffside Camas drop bulbs down the rock face, like sniped soldiers in dun and purple uniforms. Series upon series of falls, dynamited, then damned. Forward quickly. Our boggy familiars observe through rapid panels of polarity. Perching on the fishbone scaffolding, water horses, drowned girls, ancient sturgeon follow us for love or vengeance, which is to say, they may well be the ones watching the watchmen. Certain respites are named cemetery in the language of the fall line, which was not obliterated, but obscured. Is it peace? I'm going to read one more series of poems that engage with my hometown, and then I'd like to conclude with a poem that considers the hometown that my ancestors were removed from. So I'll read my current hometown poems and conclude with my ancient hometown poem. Camas glimpsed from a standing angle, a flooded meadow, pockets of blue against the dull grasses. Near Purple Grove, the river's fork is confined by levees, large rock outcroppings, like treated vellum, scored with the striations of glacial scour. The tracts where Camas was propagated, weeded, and rebulbed are under the shifted river. Thus, it is taken as a fact by those who shifted the water that the tending never occurred. Upon my return, I am mistaken for a gardener, sowing a verdant book of hours. Swans trumpet in bird falls of old logging ponds. Snow geese with black-tipped wings drip ink down my fingers. When I twist into the rocky outcroppings of the Snoqualmie Reach, looking for western hemlock beyond the talus field. A black-tipped tail flickers into the trailside brush. A gunshot sounds close. Honor the harvest. The opener of the blade must close it. And I'll finish with a poem about my ancestral hometown and my dearest hope for its future. The Shawnee people were very violently removed from the Ohio River Basin area, where at one point we were the great diplomats and traders of the whole Mississippi, or so we like to say. And occasionally I do get to go back, both with my tribe and individually. And I was just there this spring. So I wrote this poem quite recently. It's all right, it's a good closeout poem. I'm gonna wait though. That's okay, we'll wait. All right, I think I'm safe to begin. The title of this poem is A High Bank to Spare the Flood. And inside of that phrase, in traditional Shawnee concept of what a city or village could be, it had to be on the high bluff of a river so that it couldn't be flooded. So it's a hint at that conceptual understanding of the safety of community. A high bank to spare the flood. Dear future, I write to you from a bluff on the Little Miami, en route the bullskin trace, where 7 raptors gingerly draw back obsidian curtains of sky to frame the brisk cavorting of 7 lightning bolts. A stylized frieze of rowers on a Sayota canoe decorates the facade of a crumbling hotel. At Old Chillicothe, it astounds me that any of us made it back on this side of the grass. Haughty spring peepers blend with the hum of the electrical wires, and the longhouse was perhaps here, the cornfields certainly there. The sun clears so fast and bright. Prairie flowers unravel with each pass of my strides. Thrums of sun-eyed bluets and rutilated Miami mist. Some roads are named for the long lance blocking the path until the fee is paid. I do find it hard not to sprint across these pikes, warping the shuttle of townships where the cemeteries outnumber the residents, and the purple dead nettle casts a dawn-time haze across the raised fields. The bull hides mentioned above were for transporting salt, and our soft skins similarly shroud the faithful currency that opens every threshold. The biscuity undercarriage of a mourning dove and the fecund smell of dogwood blooms mark the outermost circle of Circleville. They never fail to astound me, burrowing as they did within one of the concentric mounds, brick in one hand, lead in the other, raising, then duplicating. The circle is the footprint of the city itself, with the courthouse dead center, bold as brass and forever, seeking to draft some equation to tally ratios of penance versus prudence. They mark the curves of the old frontiers in blue spray paint on the sidewalks now. Neat haunches of small deer leap into the oak savanna before the whoosh of trucks. The trail through these parts is called the Warpath, or the Virgin Trail. Perhaps there will come a time when the Narcan distribution kiosks will no longer be necessary, and the gaunt cheeks of the starving will flesh out, layer upon layer of Blackhand sandstone, who's to say which strata marks the middle world? In a ledger where the summer and fall skins, cohosh trade beads, sewn linen shirts, black wampum and copper kettles are neatly marked. There is a column that notes the amount to be carried over. And this tabulation is a part of my purpose. Alone, I am a voyager, but together, we do mark the indicated sequence of generations. And perhaps you will live to see us become citied once more. One dish, one spoon. I hope the time to come pulls its harshest punches. Dog waste bags fluttering on the periphery of an earthwork depicting the great, being a memorably solid blow that left me reeling during my time of passing. I imagine the past as a panther, and the future as any one of these elegant raptors that spiral, attack, evade, sway, and nest overhead. It's not that the grief of removal is gone. It's nodding in the back seat, quietly breathing a haze on the window as I navigate the slick lacuna of floodwater, silvery silos twirling like dancers around a maypole. Eastern redbud's plummy profusion, pawpaws' delicate leathery scabs, sprightly white suds of hawthorn, Just now, as I pass the standing stone and return on the ancient trace, in early spring, everything comes to bloom. Thank you so much, and welcome, Cedar.
Thank you so much, Laura. Really appreciate you sharing those poems with us. How's everybody doing? Good. Sorry about the announcements. They're automated. There'll be a few more. Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice way to think about it. Thank you for that. Now I am delighted to welcome Cedar Saigo. Cedar was raised on the Suquamish Reservation in the Pacific Northwest. He studied at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at the Naropa Institute. Saigo is the author of All This Time, Royals, Language Arts, and Stranger in Town. Of his work, Ron Silliman writes, Cedar Saigo is a Frank O'Hara for the 21st century, witty, erudite, serious, with a terrific ear and eye for the minutest details, at home in the world of the arts. In 2022, Cedar received a poetry grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. He is taught at St. Mary's College and Naropa University and lives in Lowfall, Washington. Please help me welcome Cedar Saigo.
Yeah, will you help me? Okay, let's see. Okay, let's see what that's like. Okay. Hello. Thank you for coming, and I just want to thank Laura for reading with me. Sometimes it feels like we're on this lifelong intermittent tour together, and it's been wonderful every single time. And I wanted to start tonight with a poem for Alice Notley, a poet who died last night at age 79 in Paris. And so I'm going to start with that. It's called Red Coat, Gold Angel. I began as a stiff narrative storytelling poet and ended as a pool of gasoline and water catching sunlight. I began as a student librarian and ended as a drunken, lonely playground teacher. I began as a formal sonnet and ended as a razor-cut gown hanging in a public toilet. I began as a watermelon-colored mountain and ended as a rainy granite quarry outside Seattle. You think you can peel my poetry zines away from my hardback gold leaf editions? I can allow for a cold rubbing of the fossil within. The Xerox light has been left on all night. It's misty in the dream. Grab my rented Parisian suit, stuff the tinfoil into my handbag, leave no doomed note, no golden numbered address, get on the train that pulls out green and backward. I'm not sure that they will know my intention. Rocks in my throbbing head, screws that hold my lungs together pop out with embarrassment. The sound along the floor that I will not be getting back. I expect to swim a random channel, fall in and out of pitfalls, romantic and financial tombs. Never hope. It all moves along the glass without the hand ever punching through. A black beetle runs across white stone. I drown in the bare grass beside it. The tick of the clock is an ant's leg torn from its body repeatedly. The Scotch broom chokes out the hillside, and the fact that it flowers goes unacknowledged. The fire of the inner orange petal is left hacked to pieces, the clouds like trailing fog. It hides the side door to the glacial mountain. The waterfall of clumsy ice will not be allowed out tonight. The trees around it absorb the nervousness inherent in this light. The dead are working the universe. They're in its shifting walls. They arrange the cobalt violets to break out like glass from behind the tundra. I can't see it. That is in fact the first sound. It forms a silver thread that we burned and let cool. The pieces twisted to winds along the ground. The pull of collage is evident in its not holding my hand ever. Are the lines of cinema too frozen and straight? Are we hounded toward our rearrangement? The dead are stuck reading scraps of our future, a soap opera convoluted and held up outside of time. But each paragraph is shown into its straitjacket. I fit miraculously into an odd sample size. And now I will read from my new book, Siren of Atlantis, published by Wave. And the book begins, on one side, it has this tarot card, The Lovers, as drawn by Salvador Dali in 1984. And then on the facing page is a quote from the poet H.D. from her last book published while she was alive, the epic poem Helen in Egypt. And this is the palinode from the fourth book, the third section. It's like the Bible. I stood indifferent to the rasp of metal, and her eyes met mine. You say I could not see her eyes across the field of battle. I could not see their light shimmering as light on the changeable sea. All things would change, but never the glance she exchanged with me. Rheograph. Tangible reflection of the fissure, leaning at rest against the wall. A Polaroid treatment of despairing poets, dissolving into flecks of sunlight, hands on knees on steps. Several ambient movements finally embossed, both hands on head, shown two ways out of the tomb. The hillside windows fogged and stuck open. A sanded figure kneels, no eyes, the sun at its most ruthless torn edge. The bamboo flooded and became a bridge in a few stained brush strokes. Hang the image off a string of others. Last rays overexposed, now frozen to the garden grass. Two blackbirds pinpointed and broken apart. The death of one is many. Texting spell. Wash and dry my hands, obscure our central point of contact, his necklace, and small talk in the mirror. Oblong, inedible cubes, each word being worth less than its equivalent note. The embargo on content felt fine, and I remain unbothered. I coast routinely upon the remains of pure music. A few lanterns get lost in the dust-up. The rain is a wobbling harp, a snake in the frosted grass, a black gleam to the pipe, wax castings of threads. The sauna is nearly empty, echoing. It must be ripped from its bedrock, bisected and filmed, bone white, lips pursed, door shut. The overflowing fountain at night, desperate Western formations, perfume on charcoal, glossy, almost without design. Shaving foam left on a mirror pulled from Lascaux, spotted and somewhat soft. Planetary orange and yellow vowels at the tip of my finger, the roof of my mouth. A vomitorium is lost without its close-up. A man of alabaster draped in black and fit. Where is the palace iodine? I had misremembered his hand as being blurred in motion. His single eye, kitchen table, early morning sunlight. This one is called The Life of Sun Ra. Okay, here we go. The Life of Sun Ra. Lay my figures bare and give them no rest. I can relate to his premise that he was born on Saturn and must be getting back soon. that the earth is a failed planet, that rehearsal itself becomes a ceremony. The art of making dances. The fire is corded openly, strings driving the bark of hounds. Gold is thrown in handfuls down the staircase, a tremor in bed. The crystal bookends sit higher than my head, giant, crowned in shadow. Every arrangement still cut for tension. The bishop is yanked along, robe trailing an awful angle. All that is allowed on stage in tiger eye or cagey red wig. Melted marble with green jacks. Very studied basic movements that provoke silence and humor. Carried over in exquisite type and tone of voice. The timing out of line. The reach in her voice across continents. Drama plus decay. Wobbling billion-dollar intonations. I've been touring this book around, and tonight I just feel like reading different ones. Sand. His footing is light itself, a slim shepherd of wolves. His teeth are momentary lights that sting our eyes, excursions. His death rattle shapes the forest floor. A sudden hand splits timbers of oak. You are a worn-out film playing in my heart. When it is finally dark, the enchanted bodies begin to slip from between the cypress. I swell, bored with the same longing. The sun emerges as a short square. Shadows tilt. You linger just out of reach. A fountain gurgles in the square, lulling me to sleep. Our mornings are still secret. You greet my soul, sending a rested wave. I could never turn outright cold. Swaths of blood at night obscure my vision. Our boredom is a daughter of indiscretion. Memory pleads at the same bronze gate. Trim down these clouds of dust. The air is still from now on. My eyes turn clear and mirrored at the foot of the spring. Not that one. The Endless Fragment. It was a Dick Ghost genocide. It was a Beastie Boys hotness I hadn't seen before. It was a full-on panic, a rooftop escape in the dead of night. It was a not-so-secret morning kiss on the rooftop. It was a romantic ghost story of old New York, with the streets full of carts and stalls and hooks catching. It was a matchbook posing as a book of poetry. The opening page was blank and bright baby blue. It was a songbook worth billions but stuck in 3 changes. It was a book of prophecies braided with random clerical work, lists and abandoned bits of memoir, solitary pleasure. Historical melodrama. Lock me away again beneath a staircase where I continue to sing the part of Orpheus, rewritten without lyre. Sleep escapes me still. Everyone in the half-empty playhouse can hear it, now struggling to hear every sound, looking behind one another and angrily over their shoulders. This was written, I was teaching a class on the prose poem. I was assigned a class on the prose poem, and I was like, I'm not even sure I know what one is. So I wrote this to find out what I thought. It's called Directional Field with Columns. All trees are trees of knowledge depending on where they hang momentarily upon a light system. How does the wardrobe change within the scheme of a paragraph? Does poetry ever wish to ride a line of prose in hopes of revealing more? Do we wish to be dissonant yet confined to a room of four corners? Is it an assignment we give ourselves to check the quality of images? They leap from my mind when doubled over. Thankfully, the prose poem has been used to countless warring formal ends, and so remains a pulsating phantom container. That's the problem with doors. They force my hand and never swing broadly enough for the lazy second half of my mind. The details that I keep encoded, they get rearranged but never spoken about thoroughly. Vocalization is over. Highly wrought opinions get shut down. Let them topple over until they recognize my silhouette among the ruins. Occasional tulips and blown out confetti, industrial songs. Let the body coil gently along the empty shore. I still don't know what a prose poem is, but it creates worlds. The roots, wet with permission, form a staggered crown. Just write what's going on around you, outside and inside. It's a conceptual universe that involves a certain number of words. How they jostle for 3 seconds on the degraded lava. It's a faded star-reliant system, almost washed away by mass adoration. The doubled screens absorb a lot of astral blowback. It's a voice cutting in from the side and finding its measure in spillage. How do I accidentally make clear my otherworldly derangements? They may prove useful, widening the trail with red reflective tile. A series of fountains lie in state. Whistling bottle rockets disregard their own report. Excuse me. It's not over until they become a complete mess on stage. This poem was written, I read a novel by a surrealist. It was called Last Nights in Paris by Philippe Soupeau. And I just felt like writing a poem, but I had nothing to say. So I just took lines from this randomly from this novel and made this poem. The Last Nights. At the door, he suggested that I look in through the window. For several days, the rain continued to fall. Paris covered itself in a veil. He seemed to be addressing his remarks to an orange couch, but his gestures made it clear that he followed a secret voice of diversion, one of those poets chosen through chance. There were months during which he lived under one certain sign, that of being followed. I didn't know him yet, and that nothing bothered him. After my conversation with the most wasted of assassins, it was easy to breathe in the alcohol of the open air. A lush garden drawn from the light of a man's eyes. I had no fear of forgetting. I dreaded the oncoming boredom of the unknown, night succeeding daylight, digging its own pit. I was determined not to lose track of this phantom more than anything else. I hid from him under a river of quiet, under a cloud of time lost. I answered his smile without thinking, as one might answer the mirror. Okay, this is the title poem, Siren of Atlantis. I've strayed too far off the block for mine own kind, and writing is not necessarily editing right now if it's the amusement of disguise over disappearance. If it's become all about dressing well and getting back to gallerists while still in my plucked helmet storming about. Is it a generative loneliness, like rebuilding my body within a passage of light? Is this the right key for the empty apartment? Jay is reading Valerie Larbeau in a tangle of light at springtime. Which specific title escapes my vision, but the platinum tip of my tail is underwriting every emotive and syllabic outburst, every instance of enraged punctuation and jealousy over not sleeping over, where there was no intended manger to begin with, where I am to be aired out prior to introduction, privy to his incredible feats of disappearance carried off in the alleyways of a Greenpoint night. I bow my staff upon a skinned knee, happy to be a so-called songwriter again, a little something coming in, whisking it all up, draped in fat lines down a dark room, slamming shut the so-called atmosphere of music. And maybe I'll just end by reading two new ones. This one I wrote in my own class that I taught with Simon Wolf, and it was a class on the List poem. And then every time we did a free write, I did the free write as well. And then when it was all over, I just put all my free writes discreetly, like into a poem, with little asterisks in between. It's called The Crusades. A tiny green star tossed aside clings to the new persimmon. Things that have lost their power, the chatter of hapless men, a green leaf in winter, a rusted out engine removed from a Cadillac, public education. Things to do on West Queen Anne. Use up a full matchbook, find old spliffs hidden in a wooden drawer, cross out useless acronyms, you're never going to believe this. Wave to Joshua's building, follow the light tearing across 3 clouds. A pinstriped general mops his brow and pencils in a few figures. A red-lined block full of children playing past dark. An onyx bust with 2 eyes crossed out. A longer song moves along the stone, sometimes losing its footing. It slips down only to start again. They had poems that they mangled beyond truth. They had some prose work they never returned to. They had some songs that gathered friends together. They had songs to ignite an earthquake. They had poems that turned to dry leaves, igniting a fire across mountains. The poets sang perfectly in tune, forgetting the real lyrics. They had costumes made of silk with glitching diamond fasteners. They had songs that provoked midnight escapes. They had poems echoed by birds over the empty valley. They had books of maps left open and drying on a clothesline. Wants and needs. I want a barbecue brisket sandwich with pickled vegetables. I want to be assigned one first edition and to travel the world in search of it. I want to quit disfiguring the marbled face of my recent sonnet. I want my black and white hoodie to wear under my barn coat. I will need to be paid quickly. I will need to finish another blurb by December 17th. I will need permission to stay in the city overnight. Silvered air blows up through a grating in the street. A new set of lungs climb the stadium stairs. The facial twitches just before you're introduced. A tiny note that straightens your tie. A new paragraph that hums like a patch of reeds. And I'm going to read this poem too. It's a poem I wrote on the death of Jerome Rothenberg. And he was a white poet who anthologized and translated a lot of Native work. And he died recently, and online there were all these white poets being like, oh, Jerome. And I got to thinking, well, what did Native people think about the death of Jerome? What do I think about it? So this is called Upon the Death of Jerome. He was an early vampire among translators of the High Court. He definitely wore our regalia plus several gallon hat, an exquisite and thirsty handful of bones. He trapped them on a table under glass with slanted beam. We read in our street clothes alongside him, and afterward I noticed no one stood in line for our signatures. He made people less excited about our present existence, but the anthologies will forever imprison the drift he never allowed to emerge, even from within conversation, the befriending. It has the chill of classic horror. I never did get to look into his eyes, a sea breeze that seemed to cast from light to dark. I did have one issue of his magazine, Al Chiringa. A black, floppy record of stories was camouflaged as a random page. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cedar. So we have time for some questions. I think Cedar needs to get mic'd up again. Yeah. Cedar, I'm going to have you sit on this side for us. Thanks. Do folks have any questions for our poets? We're just taking a moment, letting it soak in, basking.
Thanks for the reading. How is it on? Okay. If you don't mind me asking about Alice Cedar, what was the first book of hers that you really read?
Well, I think the one that I really got obsessed with was her first selected poems by Talisman House. And that was kind of before she got really infatuated with the long poem, in which every book was an epic of its own. And so for a while, I felt very intimidated by her move toward the epic. I don't know why I'm doing this. But so for a while, I really liked the wild sort of diction and collage of the early 80s work. So that was the first one. And it wasn't even that long. It was like 130 pages, but stylistically, it showed such an intimidating range. That's what I remember. I was like, do I have to take amphetamine to get this good? You know? Yeah.
Other questions? Be right there.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember me, Cedar, Laura. I had asked the question about Blue Shadow last time. Remember? Yeah. Now, since I asked that question, three things have become very apparent. There are new, the viruses that we thought, pathogens we thought we had conquered 100 years back are coming back with a vengeance. Typhoid, right? Papua New Guinea has seen a new outbreak of polio, which is slightly different, and many other variations. Do you think nature is giving us a message that we've run our time out, and that it's time we left this planet?
Well, that was an idea of Sun-Ra's that I was really enamored of on that particular day, just leaving Earth behind. And I think a lot of artists do that. They surround themselves with artists, and in Sun-Ra's case, he surrounded himself with a whole theater and troupe of people, and he lived with all of his collaborators. So I don't know, my only reaction to these troubled times, one of them, and even a reaction to the death of Alice Notley, is like, we should write, why aren't people writing poems together to grieve? That seems important and never thought of. And yeah, it's just great to have this opportunity to have you here again to continue the conversation and to be able to do this with Laura.
Hello. Laura, this is for you. So when you're writing about like your hometown or places, your landscapes, do you have a process, or how does it feel when you only have, the same words you always have to write about the same places? And how does it remain fresh for you? Or Or is there a time that your writing re-excited you about the place because it made you look at it newly?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because I think you always look at a place a little bit newly because you come with a certain different perspective, or sometimes you want to force an intentionality upon the place and sometimes the place resists. And then of course this kind of does touch on our last question. One's sense of urgency shifts. And sometimes I think of how I perceived, for example, my hometown, which is in the Snoqualmie Valley, the way I perceived it as a child changed when I had a child. And it changed now as I kind of look and wonder, what catastrophe is in store for this valley with two levied branches of a beautiful, massive river. And so I think that some of it is just that curiosity. And I'll add, unlearning the hierarchy of imagining that you as a poet write the place as opposed to the place writing you makes it sort of perpetually interesting. And it's always different. I will say, additionally, there's an emotional component too, where sometimes even of late, I do feel so deeply fatigued of the inherent trauma of sort of looking at a place and listening or wanting to write a poem. So sometimes I do feel I have to take a little break. But that's, wonderful question. Thank you.
We have a question over here.
Hi. To bounce off on Simon's question about landscape, my question is for both of you. How does landscape determine the lines in your poems?
I do quite love this question. So maybe I'll talk and think while I speak. To a great extent, I think that one's landscape, particularly when you acquire language as a young person, I feel is so deeply shaped by how you perceive the horizon, for example. Or I grew up on a mountain, so I feel that I'm a mountain poet forevermore. And I remember when I went to college, I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is in Santa Fe, a high open desert. And it was not only physically liberating, but I feel it liberated the line for me because there was no end. It was the first unbound vision. So I see it as this really interesting foundational element of how I acquired language. And so for certain, it must come into the line at every level, from intention to intuition.
And I think I was very intimidated by the idea of including landscape in my work, specifically this landscape. I think it started, I was teaching a class in Columbia City, and one of the assignments was things to do. And I made myself do things to do in Suquamish. And then that was like, retracing the landscape in a very literal way. So almost by doing it in this childish way, it made this gateway. And then also, I couldn't really deal with what was really going on with my landscape until I met other Native poets. And I was in San Francisco for a long time, running around, partying and doing that kind of thing. And I didn't really know any. I knew Jen, and once I knew Jen Forrester, that led to many other contemporary Native poets. And then I had someone to talk to about this. I had poems. Those were the people I had in mind when I wrote these poems. If I didn't know them, I never would have written them.
Any last questions, or shall we? Oh, we have one right here.
Hello, Cedar. I like how you talk about, other writers and artists that you're inspired by. Who have you both? Are there any other artists and writers that you've been recently, both of you, inspired by? Not just for your work, just in general.
Definitely. I have been looking into the work of June Jordan, this poet, and Because I'm really interested lately in, I wrote a book of lectures, and now I'm sort of interested in poems that contain knowledge like a lecture does. And just the way that she reads and throws out these ribbon-like lines that can hold ideas in them and articulation. And that's what I'm into right now. But I can't make that happen yet. I can't write an essay in verse. I just have to wander in, and hopefully there are little fragments. But that's who I'm into right now.
Yeah, and I've been thinking, or had the opportunity to think a lot about a recently departed artist named Ben Harjo, who did quite a lot of really beautiful sort of symbolic work. And it's given me to think a lot about sort of how to incorporate layers or levels in a static, in this case, two-dimensional art, and how that might speak to poetry. And of course, for reading, really every poet's such an opportunity for pleasure and learning and inspiration. And one thing that I've found really, really inspiring lately is actually outside of my genre of poetry, but the breadth of kind of speculative writing is such a fascinating space. Particularly for me, I would say I'm not a particularly speculative poet. I'm quite grounded in the present, but that's two things that I've been really interested in lately.
One last question.
It's sort of just something to reflect on. Growing up, and still, I'm in love with the Beatles. So when I think of poetry that I love, is with music. And boy, it goes deep. So poetry like this it's very calming and quiet, but you're not going to get the audience like you do like Kendrick Lamar and Super Bowl or whatever it is. So I'm just wondering what you think about that as far as being connected to the world.
Like, come on, it's a music one.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of poets, music is a huge part of like how we become poets. I know I grew up very entrenched in sort of folk Americana, and 70s singer-songwriters were big in my household. So I think I can trace some of my writing right back to that. And then when it comes to the audience, this is such a gracious audience for poetry. It's just delightful. Sometimes you read to like 3 people. And for me, I've always felt like evasion is a kind of freedom artistically. And so I embrace it because it feels a little bit like you have the freedom to observe somehow. You're not perceived in the same way that an artist with a huge crowd might be perceived. But perhaps that's sort of what we might call like a trauma response to doing a reading when 3 people show up. But I'll take it. So, every person matters. I think every person who reads your poem, it's such a thrill and privilege that's always struck me as I'm shocked that anyone listens to me or ever reads a word of mine to this day.
And I'm really into the fact of having a small community and publishing your own work and sort of, being surrounded by sort of the gossip of the scene, who's dating who's putting out who's publishing who, and why. That's horrible, So I don't think I could handle a big career or something that's overly academic. And I know I don't, for instance, I don't have an agent. I feel more comfortable without one. I think I could easily get one, but it's like what I kind of like the glass ceiling that I've fashioned for myself. But on the tip about the lyrics, I recently wrote lyrics. It's easy. It was easy to rhyme. And I think I wrote lyrics for my mother for Mother's Day because she's a musician, and she's always saying because I always brag about, I just collaborated with this poet and it was so fun. And she's like, well, I would love for you to sort of write some lyrics. So I wrote like an incomplete set of lyrics for her. And I think sometimes when we let go of our expectations, I can't rhyme, or it's lame to rhyme, or if I'm not Chaucer, I shouldn't rhyme. And once we let go of those things, then we are allowed to have fun. And those are the poems often that people are like, I really liked that.
Thank you both so much. Let's give Laura and Cedar a big round of applause.